Okay, so we've basically finished taping out our form, and if you're not working in a factory and you're not worried about mass production, and you're just trying to learn this as a hobby, this is where you want to spend some time with your thinking. Alright? You've got most of the information you need to do what you need to do next here. Alright? We're going to start sketching a derby. But let's talk about something that's not on the last, and that's the ankle. Right here, your foot has a giant bone that sticks out, a centimetre or so, and it is about that big. And depending on what we do in this area, we have to basically think about this, alright? And it's gonna seem a bit hypocritical, because one of the things that we're gonna do is create this top line as tight as possible, alright? If you think of this top shape here as the opening, this is the narrow part of the top of your foot, the ankle, the pivot point, right? So your whole leg is going to pivot across here, and this top part of the cone corresponds with where all the tendons and all your fleshy, soft tendons come up, right, on both sides. So these are very sensitive areas, alright? You're very familiar with padded tongues, and that's, a big benefit of padded tongues, it does that. And you're also familiar with padded backs, because they also provide some comfort and fit and protection for your fleshy bits, your Achilles tendon. And that's really your main concern. The other things that are sort of here, and that is the style line, which is the peak of this line that travels all the way from the beginning of the shoe, from the toe of the shoe, right? It travels all the way, right? Your pinky toe is about here in the swell of the ball of the foot, alright? So if you imagine the high point here, your pinky inside the foot will be approximately, depending on what shape you have, here, right? And your big toe will be about here, right? The end of your big toe will be there, right? And then your ball of your foot will nestle into this area here. This is the ball of your foot. And then the metacarpals come down here, and then you've got a bunch of things in your ankle bone and whatnot. All this is, from a structural standpoint, stiff, and everything from here down needs to flex along this curved line, right? For your toes to, bend, that will correspond. And this is not a static position, because when your foot is planted flat, these will be a little further back. And when you are toeing off and stepping, and your toes curl, this elongates, right? Which is why in the last I say that your toe is going to sit here. But when you toe off, your toe is actually going to come a lot closer, and almost touch, depending on how you've fitted your shoes. So lots of stuff going on in the toe. In the heel, alright, first thing I like to whack in is the heel counter line, the reinforcement line, right? Because you need to sort of have a look at your own foot, and if you flex your foot forward and pointy toes, sort of stand on your toes and look at your heel, you'll see that the attachment point of where the heel stops being a solid round heel and blends into the Achilles tendon, which is the fleshy bit, is actually around here, depending on who you are, sort of thing. But, so you look at this angle and a pattern cutter will follow the style line. Like I said, this goes all the way down, and it should meet at the peak of the heel, right? And that's where you start thinking. The peak of the heel is where the heel is. So if you're making, say, a school shoe, a typical derby, a dress shoe, you're going to put your heel counter, your stiffener, inside the shoe. And if you let's make this a nice business shoe, right? So we put a nice long, stable counter in it. The longer you make your counter, the more stable it is, and the more overhang, the more pinch you get. The heel counter's job is to hold all this shape in, and you'll see it's a pretty complex shape. And you want your top line ultimately to sit tight on this, If your upper, when you finish making it, is billowing out and not sitting on the last, you've made a few errors. So, for a nice business shoe, let's give it a nice long counter. That'll actually make the shoe a little bit more stable and more rigid in the back, which is what I like. Alright, so let's talk business shoe. Start at the top. Standard derby will have about 1 centimetre between the quarters, right? The lacing distance, right? And that's a good measure to start with in your derby. And you just want to bring that down. Now, a derby typically has as few as 3 eyelets, or as many as 5 or 6 maybe, depending on how sporty or fashionable it is. Let's go just boring here, alright? The first thing is, remember, this is this fleshy area again, so it's going to bulge out when people put their foot in. But to make it look good when we manufacture it, we follow the cone of the last here. So we think parallel as down to about here. Once the last transitions from this straight section to this dip, right, you'll notice that this corresponds with the flex points that we've sort of roughed out, right? So this is where the vamp starts kicking in. So for a derby, this is where I'm going to end the quarter, and it's basically going to be at 90 degrees to the center line, straight down. I'm going to think in an imaginary. This is a force line, not a style line. So this is just me thinking on the last, right? This is the structural point that we have to maintain strength and comfort through not having big chunks of material, right? And we also have to, allow entry for the foot so you can get in. So a typical derby is just a nice big round shape here, right, which is mirrored at the top line, and this curve should point almost similar to where this tape is, but I'm angling it back towards the what do you call that? The corner of the feather line, basically the center point. If I run an imaginary tape measure from the back center point here, it should fall roughly here, if that makes sense. So a line like that, sort of. I'm pretty confident and cocky, so I'm just going to freehand it in. And basically it should look sort of 90 degrees, right? Because we want to dip below this balloon and ankle, alright? So it should imply 90 degrees. That doesn't mean to say it should always be 90 degrees. This is definitely not 90 degrees, but you could use the same rule of thinking here. You're really following a centimetre below this ankle, alright? So for a nice business shoe, we're going to come up like this. And not only are we creating a parallel line giving allowance to our ankle to rotate and move, we're also doing a similar thing here, which will create a good fall-off effect from hard counter material at the bottom, soft counter material in the middle, to which will give the leather a blended feeling rather than just a counter and leather and stuff. And for back, I'm going to give it a nice high back, and then roll it down pretty quickly, and then basically join up the slack. I'll probably bring that down a little bit too, just to get a nicer shape in there. But if you've never made a pattern before, this is where you spend time and you get this looking really nice, you know? You want to be able to sit back and say, oh, yeah, that's a derby. Okay, cool, that's a derby. I think maybe I'm a bit low here, but yeah, it'll do for demonstration. And then the bottom of the quarter, again, shape. If you look down the quarter, down this way, alright, there's a point where this curve transitions from a convex curve into almost a concave section, right? This point in the last is almost concave, right? So you want to sort of imagine, even though it's almost invisible, you want to find the valley here, and because it's going to imply the rest of the style. So the valley in this last is basically here, and then you're going to bring that down almost to the counter. We'll bring that down just before the counter. Right. And there's a beautiful derby quarter line. You just push it up a little bit more, give it a bit more of a straight look. Now, a little trick here is to design your pattern back a little bit, right? Take a few mils off, right? And slant it, right? You sort of want to shave a tiny little triangle off there, right? And a similar thing down here. Right? Now, if this is your first pattern, don't do this. Right? Just draw it as beautiful. I'm suggesting you do this because I used to do this, because we used to make these on machines and we used to make hundreds of thousands of them things. So by doing a little bit of a reduction here, I'm allowing for inconsistencies that are going to come out in manufacturing and the process as it continues. So that's a little bit of a trick that you can do. I sort of remember doing it, and yeah, at this point the only thing we've got left to do is, let's say we put some eyelets in, and I always just put 2 in. You can run a set of dividers down there. Good set of dividers. These are essential, I reckon. But if you get a lot of practice using these dividers, you get pretty good at just doing this by hand, by eye, you know. It's pretty close there. A mil or 2 out. I mean, you can do math to divide these up, but you know, basically you can do it by eye. And certainly you do the math on the pattern. So here we've just got the basic shoe, right? And there is another structural element that's pretty important, but if you don't know shoes, you're probably not going to think about it, because this area is going to be pushed down onto the last and pulled and stretched and glued and abused all over the place. if you just bring the stitch up here and stop, it's going to create a lot of point force right at the end of that stitch. So we spread that point force out by drawing a stay, right, which is often just a little square that comes out here and it's double stitched in the bottom.